Alright guys, today we're going to continue our work with solving equations, especially with fractions on them. However, what we're going to do is we are going to focus on how to get rid of the fractions to make it a little bit easier. I understand that you can use the fractions in your calculator and it's not a big deal, but there is an easier way to do it. So we're going to start on number 1, and it says solve each of the following equations by removing the fractions first. Leave the solutions as integers or improper fractions. So I have 1/2 x plus 3 equals 7. Now, if you'll notice, we have a fraction in this equation. Now, I don't want that. I hate fractions. Fractions, to me, just make things complicated when they don't have to be. So our goal is to first get rid of that fraction. Now, to get rid of that fraction, what I need to do is multiply the whole thing by the denominator. So since I have one fraction in here with a denominator of 2, I can get rid of it by multiplying the entire equation by that denominator of 2. So notice I put parentheses around the entire equation because I want to make sure all of it is being multiplied by 2. Now I'm going to distribute that 2 throughout the equation to see what I get. So I'm going to start with 2 times 1/2 x. Now 2 times 1/2 is 1, so I'm going to be left with 1x, or just x. Okay? Then I'm going to take this 2 and multiply it by my second term, which is 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. Then I'm going to take this 2 and multiply it by my third term, which is 7. 2 times 7 equals 14. So I have taken this equation of 1/2 x plus 3 equals 7, which would have taken a little bit of work, and I've made it a lot easier to solve. X plus 6 equals 14. Now what I want to do is I want to subtract 6 from each side, and the 6 is crossed out, and I'm left with x equals 8. Now that I have the variable all by itself, I can put a box around it, and I want to check it. Now here's what's important. When you check your answer, I want you to substitute it back into the original equation, the one that they typed up and gave to you, not to this one that we simplified. That's really going to tell us if we got it right or wrong. So I want to take 8 and substitute it in for x. So I'm going to have 1/2, so parentheses 1 divided by 2. Well, come on. 1 divided by 2 times 8 plus 3. Now my calculator tells me I should get a result of 7, and that's what I got. So that's how I know if I did it correctly. So when you check your answer, substitute it back into the original equation, the one with the fractions. Now on number 2, I have 2/3 x minus 4 equals 6. So I want to get rid of the fraction. I only have one fraction. So to get rid of that fraction, I need to multiply the entire equation just by that denominator. So I'm going to multiply the entire equation by 3. So I'm going to start by multiplying 2/3 x times 3. Now when I do that, we're going to use the neat little trick that we learned on the last video towards the end. I'm going to start with a fraction, and I want you to start with the denominator. This denominator of 3, and I want to see how many times does 3 go into 3. Well, 3 goes into 3 just one time. So now I'm going to take that 1 and multiply it by 2. And I'm going to get 2x. Then we'll take 3 times -4. 3 times -4 is -12. And 3 times 6, which is 18. Now this equation looks a lot easier to solve than the original fraction. So now I can get x by itself by adding 12. And we'll be left with 2x equals 18 plus 12, which is 30. Then I can divide each side by 2, and x equals 15. Now, check your answer in your calculator with the original equation. So I want to use 2/3 times 15 minus 4. So let's see what happens. 2/3 times 15 minus 4 gives me 6, which is what I started with, so I'm good. Now on number 3, this is where things get a little bit trickier. On 1 and 2, we only had one fraction, so I could just multiply by that denominator. On number 3, I have an equation with 2 fractions, and they don't have the same denominator, so I can't just multiply by 2 or 3. Instead, what we need to do is multiply by the common denominator. So the common denominator between 1/2 and 1/3, 2 and 3, the common denominator between that is 6. And the easiest way to get that is you can just multiply them together, but be careful because sometimes that's not the smallest number that they both go into, so you'll have to think a little bit. So I'm going to multiply the entire equation by 6. So when I distribute that, I'm going to take 6 times 1/2 x. So 6 times 1/2, that's pretty easy to do in our head. Half of 6 is just 3 times x. 6 times 1/3, so I'll start with this denominator. 3 goes into 6 2 times. 2 times 1 is 2. Equals 6 times 4 is 24. Now we can solve. So we can subtract 2 from each side. And we'll be left with 3x equals 22. Divide each side by 3. And x is going to be equal, 22 over 3 cannot simplify, so it's just left as 22/3. So again, when you check your answer, substitute it into the original equation. So let's get out our calculators. And I want 1/2 times 22/3 plus 1/3. And I should get a result of 4. Let's see if that's what my calculator gives me. It does give me 4, so we are okay. Number 4, I have 4/3 x minus 2 equals 6. Here I only have one fraction, so we can multiply the entire equation by just that denominator. So when I take 3 times 4/3, since the denominator is the same as what we're multiplying by, the denominator is going to cancel out and actually just leave me with my numerator. So I'm going to be left with 4 times x. 3 times -2 is -6. And 3 times 6 equals 18. Now if you'll notice, this process doesn't make the equation shorter. It really just makes it easier to solve. We're working with numbers that are easier to do in our head. So this is much easier on our brains and less work with our calculator. So I'm going to add 6 to each side. And 4x is going to equal 18 plus 6, which is 24. Divide each side by 4, and x equals 6. Now to check this, we want to substitute it back into the original equation. So I'm going to take 4/3 times 6 minus 2, and I get a result of 6. Now number 5, I have 2 fractions, and the denominators are 4 and 2. So I want the least common denominator between 4 and 2. Now if I multiply 2 times 4, I actually get 8. And 8 is not the least common denominator between 4 and 2, but 2 goes into 4. So the least common denominator is 4. That's why we need to think a little bit before we just multiply them together and call it good. If you multiplied by 8, you would still get a correct answer. You would just have to do some simplifying at the end. So when we distribute this through, we're going to take 4 times 3/4 t. So 4 and 4, it's the same number that I'm multiplying that's in the denominator. So I'm really just going to be left with the numerator. So 3t. Plus 4 times 1/2 is 2 equals 4 times 5, which is 20. Now if you need to do the multiplication with the fractions in your calculator, that's okay. That it might be a little bit tricky for you to double check, and I'm always okay with you using your calculator to make sure you did it correctly. So if you would like to, you're more than welcome to say in your calculator 4 times 3/4. Oh yeah, that does give me 3, which gives me 3. Well, dang. Okay, now to solve, we need to subtract 2 from each side. And I'm left with 3t equals 18. Divide each side by 3, and t equals 6. Now, pause the video and check this in the original equation on your calculator. You should have gotten a result of 5, so that means we definitely did it correctly. On number 6, I have 3 fractions, but that's okay. I just want the least common denominator between all 3. Now, since I have 3 fractions, that doesn't necessarily mean I want to take 3 times 2 times 3 to get what number I'm multiplying by. Instead, I want to use my noggin a little bit and think, okay, what is the smallest number that 3, 2, and 3, which I've already mentioned, go into? Well, 3 and 2 both go into 6, so I'm going to multiply each term by 6. Now again, when you're multiplying, if you want to use your calculator, that's okay. I'm going to walk you through how to do it in your head. So I'm going to start with 6 times 4/3 x. Start with the denominator. 3 goes into 6 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. 6 times 1/2, we don't even have to do a trick for that. Half of 6 is 3. Equals 6 times 2/3. So 3 goes into 6 2 times. 2 times my numerator of 2 equals 4. Now we can solve. Subtract 3 from each side. 8x equals 1. Divide each side by 8. X equals 1 over 8. Pause the video. Check that in your calculator. Be careful, you have a lot of fractions. So when I check this in my calculator, I'm going to get parentheses 4/3 times parentheses 1/8 plus parentheses 1/2, and I need to turn my answer into a fraction. Well, I don't want that. And I get 2/3. On number 7, I have 1/2, 1/3, and 1/4. So I want a common denominator between 2, 3, and 4. So if I think here, I'm going to start with my largest number and think about the factors, or excuse me, the multiples of 4. So if I think of 4, 3 cannot go into 4, but 2 can, so that doesn't work because 3 doesn't go in there. 8, 4 goes into 8, 2 goes into 8, but 3 does not go into 8. 12, 2 goes into 12, 3 goes into 12, 4 goes into 12. So 12 is my least common denominator here. Now again, if you would have taken 2 times 3 times 4, that would have given you 24. So be careful with what numbers that you're choosing. Now we can distribute. So 12 times 1/2 x, half of 12 is 6. 12 times 1/3. So 3 goes into 12 4 times. 4 times 1 is 4. And then 12 times 1/4. 4 goes into 12 3 times. 1 is 3. Now what I'd like you to do is pause the video and finish this problem on your own. So after you subtracted 4 from each side, you get 6x equals -1. Divide each side by 6, and you should get x equals -1/6. On number 8, we have 2 fractions, denominators of 5 and 2, so the least common denominator between 5 and 2 will be 10. So we're going to multiply this whole thing by 10. So we're going to start with 10 times 2/5. So start with the denominator. 5 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. 10 times 1/2, half of 10 is 5. And then 10 times 3 is 30. Again, pause the video and finish this problem on your own. Alright, hopefully you got an answer of 25 over 4. And again, if you get an answer that seems a little weird, check it in your calculator. That's how you can tell if you got it right or not. On number 9, I have -4/3 x plus 2/5 equals 1/3. Common denominator between 3 and 5 is going to be 15. So we're going to multiply everything by 15. Now I'm going to start with 15 times -4/3. So first of all, positive times a negative is a negative. 3 goes into 15 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. So I have -20x. Then I want 15 times 2/5. So 5 goes into 15 3 times. Times 2 is 6. And then 15 times 1/3. 3 goes into 15 5 times. Times 1 is 5. Pause the video, solve number 9 on your own. All right, hopefully you got x equals 1 over 20. Again, kind of a weird fraction, so make sure you check your answers in your calculator and you'll know 100% if you got it right or not. All right, 10 through 12, all yours. Go ahead and pause the video, do these three on your own, and come back to check the answers. Okay, on number 10, you should have multiplied the entire equation by 5, and you should have gotten x equals 5. On number 11, we wanted to multiply by 12, and you should have gotten d equals 39 over 8. Again, weird answer, but you should know if you're correct by checking in your calculator. And on number 12, we multiplied the whole thing by 20, and we got x equals negative 5 over 8. Next, what we want to talk about is how to solve equations by simplifying first. So, if you look at 13, we have 2 times the quantity of 2x minus 5 equals 6. Basically, what we want to do with these equations is we want to simplify them before we start solving them. So that means I want to distribute and combine like terms before I start adding and subtracting. So I want to distribute this 2 throughout. 2 times 2x is 4x. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. And then equals 6. Now that I've distributed, I can solve the equation. So I can add 10 to each side, and I'll get 4x equals 16. And then divide each side by 4, and x equals 4. So to solve, you need to simplify first. So it's just adding a step at the beginning. Now when you check your answer, again, you need to substitute it into the original equation. So if I get out my calculator here, I want 2 times the quantity of 2 times 4 minus 5. So we'll say 2 times the quantity of 2 parentheses 4 minus 5, close your quantity. Now I should get an answer of 6. And I do. So always substitute it back into the original equation. Now on number 14, we need to distribute the negative 3 first. Negative 3 times 5x is negative 15x. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6 equals negative 36. So distribute first. Now we can add 6 to each side. And we will get negative 15x equals negative 30. Divide each side by negative 15. And x equals 2. To check your answer, substitute it back into the original equation. So I want negative 3 times the quantity of 5 times 2 plus 2. Calculator says I should get negative 36, and that's what I got. Number 15, I want to distribute first. So 5 times x and 5 times 7. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 7 is 35. So we subtract 35 from each side. If my pen would decide to write today. Goodness. And we're left with 5x equals 65. Divide each side by 5. And x equals 13. So go ahead and pause the video and check that one on your calculator first. You should have gotten that you get a result of 100, so we're good there. So when you have equations like this where you see distribution that needs to take place, you need to do that first. Once you get rid of the distribution, then you can easily solve the equation. Now if we look at number 16, I have 3x plus 7 plus 2x minus 4 equals 28. Here we don't have distribution, but what's important here is that we combine like terms first. So if you'll notice, I have a 3x and a 2x that are on the same side of the equal sign. Here's the equal sign. They're on the same side. So I need to combine those two first before I can start solving. So 3x plus 2x is 5x. And we also have a positive 7 and a negative 4 on the same side of the equal sign. Since they're on the same side, we need to combine those like terms first before solving. So positive 7 and negative 4 is positive 3. Because we're just adding them together just like normal. Then we can bring down the equal sign and the positive 28. So when you have equations like this, you need to combine like terms first. Now that we've combined like terms, we can easily solve our equation. So subtract 3 from each side, and we get 5x equals 25. Divide each side by 5, and we get x equals 5. Now, to check your answer, we substitute it back into the original one. So we got to be a little careful here. We're going to start by saying 3 times 5 plus 7 plus 2 times 5 minus 4. Calculator says we should get 28, and that's what we got, so we're okay. So combine like terms first. On 17, anything on the same side of the equal sign, we want to check to make sure it can't combine first. So here's the equal sign. I'm looking at the left side first. I have a 5x and a negative 3x, so I want to combine those two terms first, and I'm going to get a positive 2x. Now I have a positive 17 and a negative 11 on the same side. So I want to just add those two together. Positive 17, negative 11 is positive 6. Bring down my equal sign, bring down 22. Now we can solve. So subtract 6 from each side, and we get 2x equals 16. Divide each side by 2, and x equals 8. Again, to check this, we want to put it back into the original equation. So 5 times 8 plus 17 minus 3 times 8. Oh, I forgot 17. Let me try again. 5 times 8 plus 17 minus 3 times 8 minus 11. Calculator says I should get 22, and I got 22. So simplify first, then solve. Number 18. Number 18, it looks like we've got a little bit of distribution. So let's see what happens when I distribute. 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. But notice this plus 7 here is not inside the parentheses. So we can't distribute the 3 to that 7. Instead, we just have to bring it right on down. So we should get 6x minus 12 plus 7 equals 13. But before you start solving, be careful, because here's my equal sign. On the left side, I still have some simplifying that I need to do. I don't have any terms to combine with the 6x, so I'm going to bring that down. But negative 12 plus 7 can be combined to negative 5. So not only did I have to distribute, then I had to take another step and simplify again, and I get 6x minus 5 equals 13. Now that I've simplified, I can solve by adding 5 to each side. I get 6x equals 18. Divide each side by 6. I get x equals 3. Now to check in your calculator, we substitute it back into the original equation. So 3 times the quantity of 2 times 3 minus 4, close your parentheses, plus 7. Calculator says I should get 13, and that's what I got. All right, number 9. We've got two sets of distribution here, so be careful. 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. Plus 4 times 3x is 12x. 4 times 7 is 28. Bring down your equal sign, 40. Now before you start solving, make sure on your left side of the equal sign everything is combined. We need to combine those like terms. So I have a 6x and a 12x here, both on the same side of the equal sign. So I'm going to combine those to get 18x. Then I have a negative 12 and a positive 28 on the same side. So if I combine those, I'm going to get plus 16 equals 40. Now I can solve. So go ahead and pause the video and finish solving this problem on your own. Alright, so when solving this, I hope you noticed you got an improper fraction that needed to be simplified, and we got 4/3. Now when you substituted it back into your equation, you need to substitute it back into the original one, and you should have gotten that it equaled 40. Number 20 through 23 are all on your own, so I'd like you to pause the video and do those completely on your own. Okay, so on number 20, we needed to distribute and solve, and we got x equals 5. Number 21, we had to distribute and then combine like terms before we could solve, and we got x equals -1. On 22, we needed to combine like terms and got x equals 15. And on number 23, we distributed twice before we combined like terms, and we got x equals 16. Be careful on that second distribution. We're distributing a -2 instead of a +2. All right, if you have any questions, please come and see me.